In the legal world, knowledge is mostly shared through the written word, in briefs and judgments. But true wisdom, that's passed from person to person over time. Welcome to Elephant Echoes, a podcast that provides a platform for Bowman's legal veterans to pass their wisdom to the next generation of lawyers. I'm Bianca Masterton, a knowledge and learning lawyer in Bowman's Johannesburg office. As organizations such as Bowman's grow, evolve, and adapt, there is a risk of institutional knowledge being lost over time. This podcast is inspired by the great elephant herds and their complex and caring social structures. Our most experienced practitioners share their knowledge, skills, and insights as to how to become outstanding lawyers with flourishing practices. In this episode, Wilbert Kapinga, our senior partner in Tanzania, shares some of the lessons he learned during his career in both academia and private practice.
So, some of the description that people give me is a little too generous when they say I'm an outstanding lawyer with a flourishing practice. What does that mean? All I can say is one individual cannot just attain a stature of being outstanding and flourish in a practice in a vacuum. Usually you'd have a good team around you, good supporters around you, which is what I've enjoyed over the last 42 years of practice, both as an academic as well as a practicing lawyer. So most of what you see in me is a result of my interactions with the likes of Captain Kamaja, and more recently, Richard Honey, Derek, and Polani, whom we've been working very closely in numerous matters, just to name a few. What is it that helps to be able to garner all this support? I think one thing, some people have told me, a lot of humility is required when in practice, because sometimes you have very rude and vicious clients. Sometimes you have uncooperating teammates, and along the way, you have to cope with all of that. So the best is to have an open door policy, to accept criticism, to accept mistakes as lessons. And also, in terms of the practice, not to overcommit. Because if you overcommit, you actually end up being very inefficient. You don't deliver in time. So it's good to manage the expectations of your clients and your teammates, that if you are not able to deliver by tomorrow, say so 3 or 4 days before. That way you gain some respect that you've considered the deadline is not achievable, and you want to involve both the client and your team in knowing that we need to work to a different deadline and inform the client, in a timely manner. So that's how you avoid overcommitting and becoming inefficient. The other thing is feedback. I don't know if I'm very good at that, but I see that as a cornerstone of a good practice. Feedback to the client, reporting almost promptly. We don't always do that. I sometimes slacken a lot, but not just to clients, but to your team as well. So if you have a team around you, when you provide feedback to the client, copy in your entire team, even if the team includes a candidate attorney, because they are kept abreast of the reporting you've made to the client. All these combined will make you a successful, or, well, if you want to put it that way, a flourishing lawyer. Now, one thing I like to talk about a lot is how you actually develop your skills, which you may not have previously had, or they were kind of crude. Now, if I explain my academic practice, when I was an academic, I don't know if you'll be surprised, my areas of concentration were family law. and labor law. I don't practice family law anymore, but I taught family law at the university. I taught employment law at the university. But the majority of our work is not in employment at all. Now, another thing you'd be surprised is, although I like to describe myself maybe a little as a corporate lawyer or as a regulatory lawyer, I never learned company law at the university. It was not one of the courses I took for a number of historical reasons. There was no such course at the university. At the university I attended in Dar es Salaam. At the time we went to uni, Tanzania was a socialist state. So company law was an imperialist course at the university. We were taught something called public enterprises and cooperatives. Now, our cooperatives, of course, communes operating as a business. Public enterprises is because Tanzania did not have private companies for many, many years. Everything was being done by the state. So we never learned the Companies Act. It was there. It used to be the Companies Ordinance, but we were taught public enterprises, how public corporations operate. And essentially, these are state agencies. The story would be the same. They are established by a decree of the president or some order of the president. There wasn't much to learn. And the next area, in the area of corporate learning, which was taught, was called banking and insurance as commercial subjects. That was commercial. Our commercial law was banking and insurance. At the time, in Tanzania, there was only one bank, the National Bank of Commerce. And the second one was a cooperative bank. And there was only one insurance company, the National Insurance Corporation of Tanzania. They were all state-owned. So there wasn't fun even in studying banking and insurance practice. So I never studied any of these. I started showing interest in corporate subjects when I was in grad school in the US. I went to Columbia for grad school and for my master's. And for my PhD, I went to Northeastern in Boston. So that's the first time I began to get an exposure to corporate law and regulatory law. And at the time I was going to school, the regulators we see today in Tanzania had not been established. So I cannot claim that I'm a truly good regulatory lawyer because I had no academic training to that. So what did I do to pick up? After I left the university, where I left when I was dean of the faculty and joined the firm in which Kapinga Major was there, I really knew nothing. I knew no practice at all. I don't think I was a good pleader. I don't think I knew how to draft. And that's one point I need to point out. Once you're out of law school or university, you draft as if you're drafting a statutory provision. Your sentences are so long and rambling, and you use complex and arcane language like notwithstanding, therefore, whereof, thereto. None of these terms really make sense in terms of communication. So we had to learn how to use plain English, short sentences. You're not taught that at the university. The first time I was exposed to that was in a social science course I took in the US. My professor would always say, no, don't draft a sentence. The longest sentence you can ever draft is 18 words. The best sentence is 8 to 9 words. So, which means you really need to focus on how your client is going to understand your opinion with short sentences. If he's able to understand your opinion, he'll come back to you for more advice on another transaction. The majority of us write so complex opinions, and what the client, after reading it, he says, oh, well, I guess my lawyer must be right. Although, in fact, he didn't understand what you said. So the idea is our client should be able to engage with you in plain language after they've read your advice. they get the confidence to come back to you as a lawyer who is clear, not complex. I know many of us want to show we are lawyers by writing in very complex terms. I think that's not going to work. It doesn't work in practice. You end up chasing clients away from you. So to go back, how I gained some skills after leaving the university, the firm I joined, there was my partner there, was the managing partner there, had quite good experience. He started practice in 1977. I joined 20 years after he started practice. So clearly, he knew what he was doing. When he was doing a pleading, he knew exactly where the pitfalls are. When he was going to a boardroom for negotiations, he knew where to start, where to stop, and how to get a successful outcome. So when I joined him, I was pretty senior, and I was a senior academic at the university. Well, I had a PhD. What did I do? I would carry his briefcase. He was much older than me. I would carry his briefcase whenever we went to court so that I watch his moves. I would carry his briefcase whenever we went to negotiation meetings to know how he managed things. I was a true pupil. So begin as a pupil if you're new. Don't hesitate to sit in, and I encourage that. I think if my colleagues are listening, I do encourage involving the young lawyers to sit in complex discussions with clients, even if initially they're only taking notes. But the exposure is important. I do the same when meeting regulators, meeting government officials. Of course, the reason I do that, I get to release myself after some time. I leave them on their own. They get nervous, but they get things done. And that's the point I made. You don't become outstanding if you have not created a great team around you. It doesn't just work unless you're a lone gunner who is a genius. It's usually the team around you which makes you. And at the same time, you make that team as a succession plan. These are the few words I may want to say and conclude by saying that don't be afraid of making mistakes or doing something which is wrong in the process of advising. I know it's risky, but to avoid that, engage with your colleagues. Check your points on practice, points on drafting. Try to check on that. And if you make a mistake, don't grieve over it. It's usually a lesson. There are no mistakes. There are only lessons as we grow. We've all made many, many mistakes in our lives, but I'm sure as we go on living, we have learned lessons from those mistakes. So be responsive, provide feedback, do not overcommit, be open to learning, and be humble.
Thank you so much, Wilbert. That was fantastic. So let's open to the floor for questions.
Let me go first here in Kenya, Richard Harney. Wilbert, tell us a little bit how things have changed for you since you teamed up with Bowman's. What was your practice like before Bowman's, and has it changed significantly in the last few years since you've been with Bowman's?
Now, the practice I was in, although it had a brand name in Tanzania, and indeed probably in many other jurisdictions, because it was one of the first few quote-unquote organized firms in Tanzania. The practice in Tanzania for many years had been that of solo practitioners. You're called to the bar, you open an office, you're the only lawyer in the office with a clerk and a dispatcher. That was the format. It was along the Indian tradition. And many practitioners, when I was called to the bar in 1986, were operating like that. They would just be themselves and a clerk and a dispatcher, maybe a secretary as well to type out documents. And still they would call themselves Patel and Company, as if there were numerous lawyers in the firm. So that was the historical tradition. Now, the firm I joined, McCoy & Co., was one of the first few, probably one or two, which were established around the 70s. At the height of socialism, they were able to establish themselves as organized firms. They started off in the same way, which was a solo practice. And I think the next company, which I know, which was established slightly before the one I joined, was Mohammed Ismail and Company. He was literally alone, but immediately invited junior lawyers to work with him, who grew into partners over years. The same was with my previous firm. But what is characteristic about these firms, they grew as family practices, in the sense that the original proprietor of the firm tended to have absolute control of what goes on in the firm. So over years, that had to change, particularly when you now are able to engage with partners, equity partners in your firm. Your level of control would usually go away or tend to be reduced. Why many firms have failed in Tanzania is because that they were unable to move from that silo mentality of absolute control, even when there were a lot of other partners. So now what has changed is, since I joined Bowman's, first, there's complete transparency in what goes on in the firm, both at the financial level and at the management level. Two, the process of moving for juniors, of moving from A to B and to C and so forth, is very clear. The pillars are known. The boxes are known from day one when you join the firm. So that's different. In previous practices, growth from A to B tended to be largely the discretion of the founding partners. They'll just sit and say, "Oh, Bertha, you've been doing very well. I think you'll be senior partner from next year." That was it. There's no interview. There were no boxes to tick. There were nothing. Now, that's different, and we all know that. So the process of moving from A to X is clear, transparent, and known from day one. That's a very good point. And whether you get an increment this year or the year after is a function of how you performed previously, work-wise, BD, and financially, in financial terms. So, and there's a clear rating. Not everybody gets the same kind of increment. And we grew in a practice where increments were pretty much statutory. They'll just say, every year you get an increment of 5%. That doesn't work. That's very, very, very governmental. So that is a big change. And then the systems, of course, are more modern. The resources are more modernized. And that's a big change. I know in my previous firm, we had some kind of rudimentary timekeeping, but we had some system called the RTG. I don't know how it works anymore, but you're able to record your time there as well. But that was just a way of monitoring how much you expect to bill at the end of the month or at the end of a quarter. And it wasn't that strict. So, but the current system is so clear. I mean, I kind of enjoy it a little, rather too late in my practice. But that's a significant change. And I'm glad that the team around us is opening up to that modern and global kind of practice where you know what to expect. So that's what I can say in a summary.
Karule from Uganda. You've been at the game for quite some time, and I just want to know what has kept you going. Burnout is a common word these days. What has you kept going for all that long? Is it a passion that drives you? Is it something else? We would love to know. Essentially, how have you been able to do it for so many years, and you're still doing it, and you're still interested?
So what has kept me going? Yeah, there's a bit of passion, the bit of doing new things every other day. And I can assure you, I get a new thing to do literally every other day, probably with the same clients. And they all get very excited to know how I might want to deal with them. Of course, many of them have to make commercial decisions on certain things. What I need to do there is to think strategically in the context of the contemplated commercial decision and the legal framework. How does the law support the strategy and the commerce involved in the decision making? So I enjoy doing that all the time. And even if it's just a simple litigation, there are lots of things which have to be strategic. And Audax will agree with me that many clients come to us and say, we've come to you because you guys are good at strategic advice. Even when you're doing a litigation, you don't simply go in court very angry and wanting to fight out. You also strategize. How is it going to look 3 years from now or 4 years from now? So I enjoy that kind of thing. Yes, you can burn out. You'd be surprised. I often, because I have a good team around me, I get a lot of time for myself. I have a 3-year-old daughter who enjoys a lot of my time. I sometimes take him to the office these days. She will probably be a lawyer too. So if you're family, spend time with them. That will keep you going. The community around you, the team around you really makes you feel that you shouldn't stop. You should keep going on. And you must involve your team. Like if the event, sometimes I feel like I'm being offensive. Some meetings which probably require only partners to attend, I sometimes send senior associates, although they probably would expect me to go there. Some people get offended in a way, but because of a succession plan, I like to send one of my most trusted senior associates to those meetings. And when they come back, they give you the reason to keep going. So a combination of all of this, how you relate with your team around you, how you deal with your clients in a strategic way, and how you allocate time for family, it all gets very exciting, I would say, Brian. But you're young, you can be more adventurous than me.
Aniria from the Cape Town office, and thank you, Wilbert. Can you maybe just share a little about how you built up your practice, your relationship with clients, just how you went about doing that?
Now, a lot of people say your clients. They've never been my clients, really. They are the firm's clients. And that's because if you start from that perspective, then you need a lot of support around you. And I always correct my colleagues who said, oh, this is my client or their client. I said, no. None of these are anybody's clients. They are the firm's clients. And we must present ourselves at all times as a team. The reason we do that, and that's an important relationship with the client, is if any client who sees a team around you knows he or she has a backup. If the person they usually go to, say Wilbert, is not there, has traveled, is unwell, they are confident that your team of 3 or 4 good associates or an extra junior partner along will continue to do the work for them. And I can guarantee you those kinds of clients will never move to another firm. They'll always come back with more work. And our experience, they also refer matters to us. They would say, you know what, if you want proper service where there's organized advisory, go to Bowman's, okay? And I experienced that a lot of times. And even when we had issues with some of our clients, they would usually report back and say, we think so-and-so is not responsive. She left the firm. Is she unwell? Does she need support now? You don't normally hear that from a client. If they're unhappy, they'll just walk away. They'll just ask you to do your last invoice. But because you always shown yourself as a team, they never walk away. They try to find out what's holding up the work so that it continues. And that's when you correct yourself, that when you realize the responsiveness was not good enough or the feedback was not good enough, you immediately correct that by adding someone else to the team and continue with the activity. That's the main thing. Be a team. Once that is established in the mind of the client, even the client won't be bothered about how you build them, because they know it's not just Wilbert or Bertha or Derek. There is also Richard Bryce or Tamara Dini, so they can turn to any of those without the need of asking questions. So that's the essence of how we're trying to operate. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Wilbert. Thank you so much to everyone that has joined. Wilbert, I truly appreciate your time. Thank you so much. I think it's been very valuable for everyone. If you would like to get in touch or find out more about Bowmans, please visit bowmanslaw.com.